The way to analyze this is to use a regular supply and demand graph. So it's dark and stormy night that day. The party all was quiet. All right, except that we're looking into the market for loanable funds. And in the market for loanable funds, we don't use a price. We don't use a money price. Instead, we use an interest rate. So we're going to use a little r there to indicate the interest rate. And the reason we're going to use that little r is we're talking about here the real interest rate. What do you mean the real interest rate? Well, the real interest rate would be the interest rate without inflation included. See, because the nominal interest rate that we observe in our contracts, in our loans, and on our bank statements is really equal to the real interest rate plus inflation. You understand this intuitively. You've been dealing with money long enough that you realize, look, okay, you got your student loan document and it says that you're going to have to pay back 8% or 6% or whatever it is. But you understand that that 6% is in nominal terms, not in real terms, because you expect that there's going to be some inflation. The more that you owe, the better the inflation, the bigger the inflation, the better. We can talk about that more later. What we're talking about here is the real interest rate. Well, if the real interest rate isn't the same thing as inflation, where does the real interest rate come from? And the way you can think about this is the story I told about ice cream and gumballs. So I took my kids to the grocery store, and on the way out of the grocery store, there's that little machine where you can buy a gumball for $0.25. My younger daughter said, "Papa, can we have a gumball, please?" And I said, "Well, you could either have a gumball now, or you could have ice cream later." Oh, a dilemma. She says, "I'll have the gumball now." My other daughter's also with us, and she says, "I'll wait and have the ice cream later." Is there something about the value of ice cream and gumballs that is weird? No. Both of them prefer ice cream now over gumballs now. However, ice cream now, for each of them, would be the most preferred thing. But my younger daughter would prefer a gumball now over ice cream later, and my older daughter would prefer ice cream later over a gumball now. Is there something weird about that? Not really. People have different preferences, don't they? People have different preferences based upon their time horizon. How far can you see into the future? It's actually one really good measure of wealth. Right? You could be have a very high income, but also have a lot of debt, and not be able to see very far into the future. Have a very limited time horizon, such that you're anxious about money. You're anxious about having more income to pay the loans and all of the things that you want to buy. Or you could have a low income and still be able to see very far into the future. If you live in a nice, close-knit community where you know that everybody in town's got your back, if something horrible were to happen to you, then you have some stability, some security, and understanding that if anything bad were to happen to you, they would have your back and take care of you. It isn't just about income. It's about how far you can see into the future. And having a shorter time horizon makes you more interested in having stuff earlier. I'd rather have it now than later. So my younger daughter preferred the gumball now over the ice cream later. My older daughter preferred the ice cream later over the gumball now. As a matter of fact, if my older daughter happened to have a gumball on her, she would have been able to sell the gumball and gotten her sister's share of the ice cream after dinner. What's that exchange? That exchange is taking place over time. Over time. And so then we say that the interest rate is the time price of money. It's also the time price of everything else. If a good increases in value over time, then waiting will give you a higher level of pleasure. I once met a wino who was sitting on a bench eating some grapes. And I was like, dude, you have to wait. Because the grapes aren't wine yet, okay? You have to wait. Now, in this particular story, what we say here is that consumers are starting to spend more of their income on goods and services and save less. Which side of the market are the consumers in this picture? Well, households are the group that saves and lends. Firms are those that borrow or invest. The word invest gets confusing because we often think about taking money and buying some stocks and call that investing. But that's not the kind of investing that an economist is talking about. When an economist says investing in this sense, he's saying purchasing of capital and inputs into the production process. Okay? Now, are you involved in purchasing capital? Yes, you are. You're almost all borrowers. You're taking out student loans, many of you anyhow. Well, what are you investing in? That mush between your ears, right? You're investing in your human capital, your knowledge and skills and understanding. That's where the investment is going. You're buying human capital. Why? Because you expect that it's going to help you to have a higher income someday in the future, right? You wouldn't be doing it otherwise, unless you just like being in college. A lot of people go to college for 7 years. College is just fun, fine. If you got the money to do it, okay. But most of us are here, why? To invest in our futures, to develop some human capital. Well, what happens if savers or lenders decide to save less and instead spend more of their income on goods and services? Well, then what happens is that the supply of loanable funds decreases. As a result, the quantity of loanable funds exchanged in the market decreases, and the interest rate goes up. When the interest rate goes up, it means it's more expensive to buy loanable funds. It's more expensive to gain access to loanable funds. So suppose there were a project that has a 7% rate of, or an 8% rate of return, and you can get funds at 7%. Well, then you might borrow those funds, invest in that project, and then take that 8% return to pay off your loan and keep 1% profit for yourself. But if the interest rate goes up to 9%, and your project only has a rate of return of 8%, funding has become too expensive. Your rate of return can't meet the costs of capital, so you're not going to invest. If the interest rate on your student loans got to be too high, you might choose not to go to college. How high would the interest rate have to be to get you to not go to college? How many of you know what interest rate you're paying? Good, okay. It would be worth your while to go and look and actually take it into consideration. What else can we say about this picture here? What's happening when borrowers take that money and invest it is that somebody who had some money today, who could go and buy something with that money, instead decides not to consume today, to postpone consumption until later, and instead to hand the claims to real resources. That's what money is. It's a claim to buy in real resources to somebody else who could do better with it than themselves. Then that person goes and invests that money in capital equipment or in human capital or whatever, and then with the rate of return that they earn, they pay back the person who loaned them the money and get a little bit more for themselves. What's the important element on all this? Time. It takes time. Or, in other words, there is a roundabout process involved whereby our total level of production and our total level of consumption in the future increases. It's just like Robinson Crusoe taking some time away from collecting coconuts and fishes to make a net so that in the future he could get more fishes and coconuts. It's that roundabout process. And that's what the loanable funds market facilitates. By the way, when I built this graph, I should have labeled the graph the market for loanable funds. You should have that on your graph as well, the market for loanable funds. That roundabout process is really important. What makes all this possible is the fact that borrowers and lenders are able to find one another. Can I borrow $300?
If you need it.
Yeah, could I borrow it from you?
If you pay interest, yeah.
Oh, how much?
We'll go 5%.
5%. Okay. Do you think I could get together $2,000 from you all today, right here and now?
No.
Maybe. It depends on what interest I'm willing to pay. You see, there is a price on your willingness to give up the money that you have now to get more in the future. You have a threshold willingness to pay and borrow. But typically, it's actually quite hard for us, each individually, to find somebody who would be willing to loan us money. Similarly, it's hard to find somebody to whom we would be willing to lend money. What do you know about me? How do I spend my money? What am I going to do with that money? Am I really going to be able to pay you back, or am I going to default on that loan? That could be risky. All that information that borrowers and lenders need in order to have a secure transaction, they can't be doing that themselves, or they could, but it would take a lot of time and energy. As a result, there are a lot of costs involved, transaction costs, involved in trying to find somebody to whom you can lend to, or from whom you can borrow. The bank enters in, and as a result of the bank being there, more exchanges can be consummated, and they are acting like a middleman, just like the florist does, helping to pair borrowers and lenders together, helping to evaluate your creditworthiness, helping to provide lenders with an opportunity to lend to somebody who will be able to pay them back in the future. The role of financial intermediation by banks and other entities that handle these kinds of transactions is really, really important. Without a smooth financial intermediation process, it's really hard to borrow and lend. It increases the transactions costs, which means that less stuff gets invested, which means that there's less roundaboutness, which decreases our overall level of productivity looking into the future and slows economic growth. Without financial intermediation, all of that slows down. And it's because of innovations in financial intermediation that we have been able to achieve some of the growth that we have been able to achieve. Okay. Quickly, a couple of comments, logistics for the course. We have an exam coming up. We're going to actually postpone that from next week and do it on the weekend of the 23rd through the 26th. And then the week of the 26th, I'm not going to have class on Monday and Wednesday. I'm going to have class on Wednesday and Friday. So since you all are pretty settled into going to class on Wednesdays, I'm just going to have the Monday folks move to Friday for that week, the week of the 26th. I've got to be out of town that weekend. So that's how we'll rearrange the class, but then there will be an online exam that you'll be taking. It'll be, I think, about 50 multiple choice questions, all right, based on material from the textbook. And then there will be some short essay questions based upon the supplemental readings. that you guys have done. So make sure that you're all the way up to date on all the supplemental readings on Canvas. And I owe you another Canvas content quiz or two. So I'll be getting those up so that you kind of are prepared for the exam. Are there any other questions about the logistics of the course? You had the balance the budget assignment that was due, I think, on Sunday. If you haven't done that, go ahead and do it and turn it in. And then you had the probability of your vote determining the election. I think that's due on Sunday of this week. Mm-hmm. And then there's a new assignment that's posted called Santa Claus and Trade. And this is all based upon a Planet Money podcast episode that I posted a link to on Canvas that I'm going to ask you to listen to. Now, there's a bunch of videos on Canvas this week. There's a lot of stuff, or they're mostly on Sapling. But there's a bunch of content on Canvas this week that you need to get through. I think there's 4 different articles to read. And then on Sapling, there's a bunch of videos. And then I also posted a couple of videos and the podcast to Canvas. So make sure you get through all that material. It's all going to be assessed. The Santa Claus and Trade article is going to ask you to draw some graphs for the assignment. So I'm going to show you how to draw that graph later on today. First, let's talk about a little bit more about financial intermediation and how it affects your life and how to think about the long term for each of us. Most of us have been socialized into a certain quality of life. Okay, so most of us have a certain expectation about the level of consumption that we're going to participate in over the course of our lives. Right? So you may have grown up with a certain family income, and you have a certain quality of clothes, a certain quality of shoes, a certain quality of car, a certain quality of housing, and you expect to enjoy that level of quality of life, or maybe a little bit better over the course of your life. Most of you, similarly, right now, have relatively low incomes because you're in college. Which is to say that for most of us today, our consumption is greater than our income. How do we achieve that? By borrowing. By borrowing. So a lot of us have student loans, or maybe your parents are helping to pay for some things, or maybe you had a gift from someone. I don't know how you're doing it. I'm glad that you are. But for most of us, our income right now is lower than our consumption, and as a result, we are borrowing. Now, as we complete more and more schooling, our potential income increases. As you finish 1 year of college, your income goes up a little. Finish 2 years of college, your income goes up a little. You finish 3 years of college, your income goes up a little. Finish 3.5 years of college, your income goes up a little. Graduate from college, and your income goes up a lot. Why? Did you learn everything that you needed in that last semester? If so, why not take that last semester first? Right? Yeah.
Once you get a college degree, your income is doubled by if you got a high school.
But why? Why is it that there's this big leap from 3.5 semesters to 4 semesters? Did you learn everything important in that last semester? No. There's a strong signal that gets sent to employers when you finally graduate. It says, I can finish something. I'm not an idiot. I have stick-to-itiveness, and I finish things. It's called the sheepskin effect. And that's because back in the day, when you got a diploma, they would print it on sheepskin because it would last longer. Paper would degrade. Also, there were probably more sheep then. But they would print your diploma on sheepskin, and that diploma said to the world, I've done something. It's a little odd that it works this way, though, but it is the way that it works. So the first lesson is finish. And I have students who ask me, should I take a double major? And I'm like, well, how many more classes would it take you? Would it take you another semester of school? Then no. Right? Should I get a double major? Well, probably not, but is it going to be an econ? Because if so, then yes. Ha ha ha. All right. If you are going to get a double major, you should treat it like investment. Because after all, that's what we're doing here. We're developing human capital. And when you invest, do you invest all in one stock? No, you diversify. So if you're going to take a second major, Make sure it's in something as different as possible from your primary major. Do something very different with that second major. Or make one of those second majors be more like something that is a trade, like being an accountant or doing radio or some sort of skill, or nursing, that actually has a trade kind of relationship with the marketplace. Okay, here's your income. What about your consumption? How is your consumption going to change as you go along through life? You're in college, you're consuming ramen noodles, you graduate. Are you going to maintain the same level of consumption, or are you going to spruce it up a little? You'll probably spruce it up a little, won't you? Probably not a lot. Why not? You got to pay back the loans, right? You got to pay off your loans. Okay, so then you're going through life, right? And then you've been in your first job for 3 years, and then what happens?
Your income increases even more.
Why? What happens after 3 years on the job? You gained experience, and so then what? Yes?
You get promoted.
You could get promoted, although that's not as likely. What else could happen? You could get a raise, that's a possibility. What else could happen? Most likely, what's going to happen is you're going to get an email. That's what you really want to have happen. You want to receive an email from a headhunter. You want somebody else to come and hire you away from wherever it is you're working now to go work someplace else. Okay, that's how you make the really big leaps in income, is by switching jobs. Why? Well, that first 3 years on the job has indicated to the rest of the market, this person is not so much of a jerk that they wanted to fire them. I'm not saying you're not a jerk. I'm just saying you're not so much of a jerk that they want to fire you, right? You've been able to keep a job for 3 years. You've kept yourself alive for 3 years on your own. This person can handle some responsibility. Okay? And hopefully during those first 3 years on the jobs, you have been learning skills. Right? The goal would be to take as your first job, maybe not the job that pays the most, but the job where you can learn the most. The job where you can develop new marketable skills the most. Now, how many times are you going to change your job over the course of your life? I think I'm on my 5th or 6th job right now. And I fully expect to change jobs 3 or 4 more times over the course of my life. Is that the way my grandparents saw the world? No, they expected to be in one job pretty much for their whole lives, then retire, get the gold watch, and move to Florida. Okay? That's not the world we live in anymore. The world we live in, you should expect to change jobs pretty regularly. Why? Because the world is changing so fast. It's a dynamic market out there. And it's the people who don't plan on changing jobs that can't. It's the people who aren't learning new skills while in their current job that don't have the ability to pivot to a different job. So you get a job. What should you be doing in your free time? Netflix! No. A little bit of Netflix. But you should be reading. You should be learning other new skills. Again, preferably skills that are as different as tolerable from whatever skills you're exercising on the job. Diversifying your skill set. Never stop learning. Always be getting ready for your next job. Always be training yourself for whatever your next job is going to be. Okay, so your income goes up. You're in your next career job. And then you're moving along. You get married. You have a couple of kids. Right? You get a divorce. Don't do that. That's expensive. Don't get a divorce. That'll throw you way off. You'll end up back in debt again. Try to avoid that at all costs, okay? Which means that maybe be really careful when you get married. Okay? Be really careful before you get married. Okay?
This sounds like real life experience.
I've never been divorced. And I never hope to be. Very happily married. Okay, so let's smooth this out a little bit to make it a little bit just simpler to look at here. Okay? But I've known people who got divorced. Okay, so here's your consumption. You're not trying to make it go up a whole lot. And then what happens right about here? When you finally paid off your debts, actually. You finally paid off all your debts, and you're moving up in your job, you get promoted to the manager, or maybe you start your own firm or something like that. And so your income is continuing to go up. And then, yeah, at some point, boom, what happened to you? You retired. Okay? And all during this time frame, you are saving. Okay, you're saving. Now, hopefully during this time frame, your kids move out of the house. Hopefully they move out of the house. And maybe one of them gets married and you have to spend a little bit on a wedding, all right? But then hopefully, they're out of the house and your expenses are lower. You can move out of the house and into a small apartment. Your overall expenses are decreasing, okay? And you're going along like this, and then what happens? You assume room temperature. You get dead. Okay? You get dead. And so during this time, you're in retirement, and you are using up what you have saved. Now, how much do you want to have for retirement? What quality of life do you want to enjoy in retirement? Well, that might determine how long you continue working. What happens with the previous generations is a lot of people had too much life left at the end of their money. Right? A lot of people will say too much month left at the end of the paycheck. But the big picture of that is too much life left at the end of your money. You had saved up some retirement money, but then you lived longer than you expected to, because a lot of people didn't expect to live to beyond 60 or 70 years. That was the norm for my grandparents' generation when they were kids. But then they all lived to be 80 or more. What about you? How long do you expect to live? What age do you expect to be when you die? How many of you were vaccinated against chickenpox? They didn't have that when I was a kid. There was no chickenpox vaccine when I was a kid. So if one of the kids in the neighborhood got sick, all the moms would get together and get the kids together so that the kids would all get chickenpox so that they could get it taken care of and out of the way. Especially if like one of your brothers or sisters got chickenpox, they put all three of you in the bed together until you all got it. Why? That way mom knows, for these 2 weeks, I'm going to be dealing with sick kids with chickenpox. I don't want to deal with one kid for 2 weeks, another kid for another 2 weeks, and another kid for another 2 weeks after that. Let's get it done and out of the way. This is the normal way of doing things. It wasn't until the 1970s, or a little bit later, that almost all of the childhood disease vaccines have been invented and developed. Now today we're dealing with a new pandemic, where we need another new vaccine, but for the most part, you guys have been vaccinated against primary things that would have killed you. Why do so many people today die of cancer?
Because it can't be vaccinated.
Because nothing else killed them. All the other things that people normally would have died from, they've been able to treat. Why do you die of cancer? Because you didn't die of anything else. It's a horrible way of looking at it, but it's the truth.
Might that be death by old age?
Yes, death by old age, but there's always some sort of malady attached to it. If you're not planning on living to be about 100 years old, you're underestimating. I fully expect to live to be 100 years old, and I'm not in the best of health. Okay? All right. Another thing that happened was a lot of people put their savings into their house. Right? They bought a bigger house and made that their main investment. That happened here in Muncie. The people who worked in the factories bought houses and fixed them up and took good care of them and expected to sell the house and move to Florida when they retired. But what happened? Yeah.
They thought that their house value was going to keep increasing because of land, but that's a myth.
Well, it's not necessarily a myth. What happened in Muncie is all the factories closed, and so there's no reason to move here, unless you're going to be an economics professor. So all these people put all their money into their houses, and now what are their houses worth? Hardly anything. You could buy a house in Muncie for $10,000. There's one downtown that I know about right now. It's 700 square feet, tiny house. I went to a tax sale last fall where the county government was taking pieces of property that nobody had been paying taxes on and was selling those empty lots, right? They're empty lots in town with water, sewage, electricity all ready to go, but it's an empty lot right now. They were selling the empty lots for $25. 25 bucks, you get a lot, ready to go. Buy yourself a double wide, move in there with your friends. You got to deal with the meth heads next door, but okay. In the meantime, my brother-in-law just bought $1 million house in California. Because that was the size that they could afford. That was the low end of houses in California. Okay. This whole model, where the basic premise is that your lifetime consumption isn't going to change a whole lot with your income, that you're going to have a pretty constant level of income. That's called consumption smoothing. All right, and this is a pretty good model for understanding how people handle their money. What if you win the lottery one day and your income goes up? How's that going to affect your lifetime consumption? It could, but it's not going to go up by the same amount we don't expect. Right? What most people would do with a windfall like that is pay off their debt faster or save farther for retirement. So instead of having a big jump in consumption, maybe they'll have like a little blip, a tiny little increase over lifetime consumption. Instead,
Unless they get robbed.
Unless they get robbed?
Unless they get robbed.
Okay, that's true for almost any situation. Yes.
So like, let's say I want like the grand, like 100 million.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't my consumption like go all the way up?
I mean, it will, but I mean, it depends on how you're going to deal. You're not going to spend all of what you got all at once.
But I would.
You'll still smooth that blip over time.
Oh, I understand.
All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about was taxes again. Again with taxes? Yeah, again with the taxes. I was thinking about it and realizing, we talked a lot about the marginal tax rate, but we didn't talk about all the other taxes that people pay when they have to pay their taxes. For example, when you have your income, let's just treat this like as a regular supply and demand graph, right? And you supply labor, so there's the market for labor. And this is the quantity of labor. What am I going to put here? Not price, but since we're talking about labor,
It'd be the real value.
I'll put wage. I'll put W for wages, okay? Now let's suppose you earn $75,000. That's the number that's on your contract, on your salary contract. You actually get $75,000? No. We already know that you pay 16% in average, your average tax rate. So that means that your income is less than $75,000. But do you know that you also have to pay your FICA taxes, which is Social Security and Medicare? That also affects your income. It reduces your willingness to supply labor, but it also means that your actual take-home pay is less. And then you also have to pay Medicaid taxes, which is 1.45%. And then you also have to pay Indiana state taxes, which is about 3%. If you own any property, you have to pay property taxes, but property taxes are a tax on wealth, not on income. What other taxes might you have to pay? You might have to pay sales taxes. Sales taxes is 7%. Now what about your employer? Well, your employer has told you your salary is $75,000, but they also have to pay the FICA tax. They also pay 6.2% on FICA taxes, and they also pay 1.45% in Medicare taxes. And then, if you're earning $75,000, they hope to be making some sort of a rate of return on what they're paying you. What's a competitive rate of return in the market? If you're going to invest in something, maybe 10%. That means that they got to pay another $7,500, 10%. Well, that's the rate of return that they're expecting from you. And so they're expecting to earn $7,500 off of you, but then they have to pay corporate profit taxes, which is again 21%. So they're going to have to pay taxes on top of that. Which means that in the end, this is the final equilibrium. This is how much you cost your employer, and this is how much you actually get. It's a little exaggerated. It's not to scale. Let's put it to scale. Let's put some numbers on this. I ran the numbers.
I am now largely interested.
Suppose again your income is $75,000. First, you're going to pay what is it, 16.586% income tax. Okay, that brings you down to $62,560.50. That's after your income taxes. Then you have to pay your FICA taxes. That's, so let me put this here, that's 16.586%. Then you pay your FICA taxes, which is 6.2%. That brings you down to $57,910.50. Then you have to pay your Medicare taxes, which is 1.45%. That brings you down to $56,823. All right. Then you have to pay Indiana state taxes. Now, I want you to notice this percentage, and this percentage are all percentages of this number. So you're paying 6.2% of this when you move to that. All right. Then you also pay Indiana state taxes, which is 3.23%. That brings you down to $54,400. And then for everything that you buy, with the actual money that you get to keep, you have to pay 7% tax on all those things. So the actual value of the goods and services that you're actually able to buy is about $50,592. In the meantime, your employer has to pay that 6.2% FICA tax. That means that you cost them $80,737, but then they also have to pay the other half of the Medicare tax, and that brings the cost of you to them up to $82,312.50. Actually, I think I skipped the number. I'm sorry. I did. This should be $79,650. This should be $80,737, and then the profit tax. So you're worth $7,500 to them, and then they pay 21% tax of whatever their profits are on you. So that bumps their total cost of hiring you up to $82,312.50. This is what you cost them. This is what you get to buy, which means that the total tax paid is $31,720.04. That's a lot of money in taxes, isn't it? Is that more or less than what you expected? Less? More? I don't know. And that doesn't include the property taxes that you pay on your house. Well, I don't own a house. Okay, you don't own a house, but your landlord does, and your landlord has to pay property taxes. Don't you think he includes that in your rent? Of course he does. Of course he does. Right? So that doesn't include that. So that also further wheedles down your actual disposable, spendable income. Notice what else is happening. We started out here, and we moved to here on the graph for the quantity of labor. What is it called when the quantity of labor decreases? Unemployment. Taxes create a wedge for employment. And then there's one other thing to notice about this graph, and that's this. What do we call all of that? Those are the surpluses that would have obtained without any taxes, but now no longer do because these exchanges are no longer consummated. What do we call that? Dead weight loss. And that's not accounted for at all. In most markets for goods and services, let's call this the market for shoes. Suppose that we're talking about a closed market, which is to say that there are no imports or exports. All of the shoes that are made in the United States get bought by people in the United States. All of the shoes bought by people in the United States were made in the United States. A closed market. If that's the case, then we find that there is a consumer surplus and a producer surplus. These are the surpluses from the number of shoes that do get exchanged. The consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. The producer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply curve. We've done this before. Should be pretty straightforward. Now, what if everywhere else in the world, shoes are more expensive than they are in the United States? What if the price of shoes in the rest of the world? What if the price of shoes everywhere else in the world is higher than the price of shoes in the United States? If we take that closed economy and open it up and allow for international trade, what should we expect to happen? This price line now sort of acts like a demand curve. The demand of the world for shoes. And at that demand curve, the point where producers would supply those shoes is here. So this is the quantity supplied by domestic producers of shoes. But how many domestic consumers are going to buy shoes? Since the price is higher, these people in the United States don't want to pay that much for a pair of shoes, so only this many pairs of shoes will be bought in the United States. The difference will be exported. And those will be sold in other countries. Now, what has happened to the surpluses as a result? Because consumers now are only going to capture this area of surplus. And you might need to draw these graphs a couple of times, like separate graphs, so to follow the logic all the way through. Of course, you can just watch the video and see how it goes. The producers, after the market has opened, capture this whole area of surplus. So they're taking away some of the consumer surplus that was being captured before, and they're actually capturing extra surplus that was not in the domestic economy before. So overall, the domestic economy is better off as a result of being opened up to exports, even though American consumers can't buy as many shoes. They'll buy something else instead. Are you with me? Okay. This is what happens if the price of, for the rest of the world, of a good or a service is higher than the price in the United States or inside of the domestic economy. If instead we have a situation where the price of shoes in the rest of the world is lower than the price in the United States, this is actually going to, instead of being like a demand curve, it's going to be like a supply curve to the market. And what will happen is that at this price, consumers will demand, because I'm on the demand curve here, this many shoes. At this price, domestic producers, and the difference would be goods that are imported. In the meantime, consumers now are able to capture this whole big triangle of surpluses, and producers only capture a smaller triangle. Some of the surpluses have been transferred from producers to consumers, and then there's this region of new surpluses that are captured by the economy, making the entire economy better off than it was when it was closed. Different markets are specializing in their relative comparative advantages, making everyone better off. Not quite everybody, though. The producers are made worse off, aren't they? Now, does a producer have to make shoes? Like Nike, do they have to make shoes? They almost don't even anymore. They make all this other stuff besides shoes, in addition to shoes, right? So do we care what it is that a firm makes? No, a firm is like a legal fiction. It's not really a person. We don't love a firm. We might love a certain product, but we don't really love it, right? A firm can go ahead and make something else, but they don't want to. It would be too much work to do that. They don't want to do that. They're upset by this. This particular firm, I'll come to you when I'm done. Write it down so that I get to them. These firms, these shoemakers are upset by this scenario. Their surpluses have been cut into. And so what are they going to do? They might appeal to the government for protection from foreign competition. That protection can take the form of a tariff. A tariff is like a tax. A tariff is like a tax on imported goods. So it's sort of like shifting the supply curve left. That looks like it's going up, Professor Schnell. I know, but it's left because it's a supply curve. What happens now? Well, the price of shoes has gone up for who? For domestic buyers. That's right. So domestic buyers, their demand for shoes decreases, and domestic producers' supply of shoes increases. This is the new number of shoes that are going to be imported. That's our new imports. And this is the size of the tariff. So then this region, that's the tariff revenue. That's the money that the government gets. We're going to continue to assume that the government spends the money perfectly. Ha ha ha. But then we were left with a couple of different things going on here. Because in the past, this is the quantity of shoes that were purchased. But now some of those transactions have been foreclosed upon. And the surpluses from these exchanges, these surpluses right here, that region, those surpluses no longer obtained. What do we say when surplus is no longer obtained? It's a dead weight loss. So this region is a dead weight loss. Are we done? Not quite. Because these surpluses right here are also no longer captured by anyone. Neither the producer, neither the domestic producer, nor the domestic consumer is capturing those surpluses. These surpluses are lost, and they're not even being captured by tariffs. What's happening here is that these shoes, this pair of shoes, this pair of shoes, this pair of shoes, this pair of shoes, are being produced using technology or inputs that are more costly than the technology and inputs that a foreign producer would have used to make those shoes. The costs of production for the domestic producer are higher than the costs of production for the foreign producer. Those costs represent real resources that have alternative uses. The resources that are being used to make these shoes could have been used to make golf clubs or more coconuts or a new Alabama Shakes record. Okay? Any of those kinds of things. But instead, these resources are used in an inefficient way, so we call this area wasted resources. It's not due to transactions not obtaining. Instead, it's due to resources being used inefficiently because now the domestic producer has an incentive to make those shoes. Notice, they charge the domestic consumer the same price as the foreign producer would charge for their shoes. They've raised their price. As a result, the domestic producer has not just this area of surplus, but they're also capturing this area of surplus. That trapezoid, that last area of surplus that is captured by the domestic producer, is the reason that the tariff was put in place. Now, how do you get a tariff put in place? What's the process for getting a tariff put in place? What's the mechanism? You have to go to your congressman. You got to fly to Washington, D.C., and bring your congressman a present, something that's legal for them to receive from you preferably, or hard to detect. Then you take your congressman out to dinner. And then you have to pay for your hotel room for the night, and then you have to pay for your flight back. All of those costs. How much would you be willing to spend lobbying for a new tariff to be put in place so that you could capture these additional surpluses? Suppose these additional surpluses amount to $1 million. How much would you be willing to spend to capture an additional $1 million? Maybe $999,999.99. Maybe not quite that much, but something close to it, right? Something close to it. So then these gains to the producer are not even gained by the producer. They're instead spent on the congressman and on other things, on activities that aren't really productive in the world for the rest of us. They're spent on activities that aren't really valuable for the rest of us. And we call that rent seeking. Because you're seeking after a property in the right to have protection from competition in your marketplace. And if you own property, the profit you earn on property is rent. So we call this rent seeking. It's a funny word, actually. It doesn't make perfect sense that we use that term, but we do. By the way, the theory of rent seeking has only existed since the late 60s, early 70s. It's one of the newer additions to economic theory. Rent seeking is like this. How many of you wrote a scholarship essay when you were trying to get money for college? Anybody write a scholarship essay? Yeah, sure, okay. And suppose that scholarship essay was going to give you $1,000. All right? Not a bad scholarship. You're going to get $1,000 if you win this scholarship. But you've got to have the best essay, right? Okay. How many other people are also applying for the scholarship? Let's say about 1,000. Let's keep it lowball. Let's say 1,000 people are applying for that scholarship. Okay? Now, how many hours did you spend writing your essay? Maybe 10? Give or take? 10 hours? How much time would you be willing to spend? It's $1,000, right? Suppose you get paid $10 an hour. You'd be willing to spend how many hours? Up to 100. You're not really gonna. You're just gonna spend 10 hours. All right? You spend 10 hours working on your essay, and so does everybody else. All the other potential students are also spending 10 hours, and all of them could have been instead working and earning $10 an hour. So you've got 1,000 people who each have given up $100 of actual income in pursuit of $1,000, and as a result, $100,000 worth of effort has been expended, all chasing the same $1,000. Oh. You can't give money away. Because when you do, more than one person shows up to try to get it, and they're going to use up resources trying to be the person who gets that money. They will be willing to use up resources equal to the amount of the prize. You can't give money away. That's called rent seeking, folks. That's called rent seeking. It's an inefficiency in our marketplace. Okay, I will see you all next time.